We're
Okay.
all from Efrat, actually.
I actually was out. That was the
This is
first
an
thing I was
Efrat
going to
panel.
say.
We're one
Efrat
town.
panel, yeah.
This
We
was
are
not-
Judeans, official Judeans right here.
So, first question.
What's it like?
Violent extremist settlers or Jews from Judea? What do you identify as?
Why can't we be both?
So I did actually just realize that today. We have the panel from Efrat here today. So great to have you all. And I did want to note, like, if this was a anti-Israel protest, they would consider all three of you guys settlers from the West Bank. But it's a little more difficult to say that a Jew should not be allowed to live in Judea. And here we have three Jews who live in Judea. So that, a little bit of what I want to talk about today is messaging. I like to get into details and practicalities. We talk a lot about, the world talks a lot about a two-state solution, a Palestinian state. We talk a lot about Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland, and why it matters. So I want to get into a little bit of the particulars on that. What does that look like? What does it look like in Judea and Samaria today? In the audience, raise your hand if you've been to Israel before.
Wow.
Wow. Raise your hand, keep your hand up if you've been to Judea and Samaria. All right. So this is a good crowd. We're in the right crowd. But for years, the world has believed the lie of the two-state solution, right? And today, even though anti-Israel countries and governments are still pushing for this agenda, even our American administration on some level, the world's waking up. All of us obviously know, and everyone watching on the live stream, we have hundreds of people watching online as well. We know that this is a suicidal idea for Israel, for the Jewish nation. But the question is, where do we go from here? What are practical answers to these issues that we've been dealing with for years for the land of Israel? What about the Arabs who reside in Judea and Samaria? And the question everybody's asking themselves now, what about Gaza? What happens the day after Hamas is eradicated? So, first question is, pretty sure everybody already knows. I don't even have to assume this. All of you three are strong advocates for Israel's sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Let's just say the entire land of Israel, right? Inside that idea, has anything in your position inside that idea changed since October 7th? Let's start with Yishai down there on the end.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke, and thanks very much for this great panel. October 7th did not change much in our thinking because we actually predicted it. My wife and I moved down to Gaza in 2005 to protest the so-called disengagement. We were like, this is going to lead to the jihadist takeover of this land. And if you do that, then Arabs are going to be oppressed. They're going to rocket at the Jews, at Israel. They're going to tunnel. They're going to do bad things. And that's exactly what happened. And it's not because we are prophets or sons of prophets. It's because it's obvious. It's interesting. The Torah tells us don't give away your land. But that comports exactly with common sense. Don't shrink in the Middle East. That just gives a tailwind to the jihadism. As I said before in an earlier talk, you talk to Arabs, they always say to me, you guys are shrinking. You guys have left the Sinai, you left Gaza, you left parts of the West Bank, so-called, you left South Lebanon, you even left parts of Jerusalem. You guys are shrinking, and we're going to get rid of you in time. So we said that. We said, don't walk away from Gaza. Also, have you ever looked at the map of Israel without Gaza? It looks like somebody with a missing tooth. It's like, shit. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. It's senseless. It's senseless, and this pathway is senseless. On top of which, the disengagement was after we had already seen the failure of the Oslo Accords. We've seen the failure of where it leads to when you let other people take over your land. It's wrong. Again, Israel is a small, tiny, ethnic state, a Jewish national state, defended and armed in a tough region. So did October 7th change anything? For me, no. It was just a affirmation, a sad affirmation of something that I knew was going to happen. And if we extrapolate it even more, we know that there's problems in Judea and Samaria with anti-Israel Arabs living there, in Israel proper, with anti-Israel Arabs living there and calling for jihadism and destruction. What did change, though, is that there's been a slight awakening, an awakening of sorts. not big enough. A lot of people have come to understand that land giveaway is dumb, and that Israel should be strong, and that leaning on just a mechanized, a little military that's small but technological is false, and that you have to hold on to these lands. So now I think there is a little bit more of a conversation. I wish it was bigger, and so I'm very thankful for this conference that we're getting a chance to talk about it. But it has not changed that much, but it has opened the opportunity for a greater discussion. And I'm sure my colleagues will talk about how the deep state continues to rule. We have our own problems in Israel with people on the political, let's call it left, or the Israel shrinkers, who are still holding on tough in the bureaucratic positions and in the military positions. And we hope to God to start to dislodge them. And when I tell Knesset members that become, let's say, ministers or have any opportunities to hire people, and this is what my mom says. My mom says, tell the Knesset members and the ministers the most important thing to do is fire old bureaucrats and stick in new ones, good ones, into every level to get rid of that deep state, or to at least replace that deep state with some healthy deep state.
Good. Carolyn, so in your book, which everybody should read, The Israeli Solution by Carolyn Glick, I read it a number of years ago. You deal with what a lot of people consider to be the demographic issues for Judea and Samaria. Would you say that as we advocate for Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, has anything changed for you after October 7th?
I don't know whether it was October 7th per se, but October 7th certainly crystallized a position that I had moved towards over the past several years, since the book came out 10 years ago. In the book, I advocate for giving a path to citizenship to the Arabs of Judea and Samaria, arguing that their numbers are half or less of what the left and the United States and really the international community claims, because it created out of whole cloth over 1 million Palestinians. They increased the population by 50% just out of whole cloth, and kind of like just opening up the southern border and letting everybody in the entire world enter the United States. So we didn't do that, so they just pretended we had, and they increased the number of Palestinians by over 1 million. And I said, just looking at the demography, that it made more sense to give them a path to citizenship than to establish a Palestinian state, because the latter is an existential threat and the former is a policy problem of how to deal with them and how to integrate them into Israeli society. And that was a change that was already happening among Arab Israelis during the civil war in Syria, where they were looking and seeing Israel as the safest port in the storm, and you saw increased integration into Israeli society by Arabs. But the problem was that that trend that I remarked upon in my book was reversed, due in part to bad policymaking by the successive Israeli governments that didn't know how to empower the moderate forces inside of Arab Israeli society. And instead, we saw the rise of Islamist forces and other just extreme Ba'athist parties in Israel, in the Knesset, that were openly treasonous, and they sucked up all the air in the Arab-Israeli community, to the point where the moderate voices that we had been hearing while I was writing my book were really sort of extinguished, and the integrationist trend was reversed. So that sort of disaffected me from my position that I expressed in the book, that it would be possible to provide a path to citizenship for the Arabs of Judea and Samaria, and my conviction that was no longer a viable position, obviously calcified on October 7th, because you see that societies where you have any indoctrination towards jihad simply cannot be tolerated in a non-Islamist society, because they're exterminationist. And so I think that the model today going forward is really a model of what David Friedman talks about and others have spoken about, which is just, okay, and actually Yitzhak Rabin talked about it in the 1990s, which was, okay, we're forming this autonomous self-governing authority in Judea and Samaria for the Arabs. Let them just maintain it. Now, I don't actually believe that as currently constituted, the Palestinian Authority is something that is viable because it's a terrorist authority. I think that you have also you have organic divisions inside of Arab society in Judea and Samaria, that a lot of it is tribal and clannish. And what Israel did when it brought in the PLO from Tunis and just sort of asserted its control over the locals in Judea and Samaria and Gaza was a great disservice to the people who were living there, because you essentially brought in a foreign conquering terrorist army and said, deal with them. And so I think that the idea should be to, I mean, the Palestinian Authority has already basically dismantled itself. It has no support level on the ground in Judea and Samaria. Mahmoud Abbas, who is like this sick old man who is now in the 19th or 20th year of his 4-year term, you know, he will die at some point, and a lot of the diehard fans of the Palestinian state thing are trying to figure out how to resuscitate the Palestinian Authority at all costs and using it like some sort of, you know, charm bracelet that if you just have it, then, you know, nothing bad will ever happen to you, which is exactly as useful as praying to Tinkerbell, you know. And so that's sort of this totemic belief. And I think that the truth is that what we really have to do to be safe and to reach some sort of place that's a stable long-term parking space with the Arabs who live amongst us is to let them just not be aggregate, not to be unified, because they're not, and to allow the local leadership of the various areas, the various clans, to return to a kind of traditional organization of autonomous areas. Of course, that flies in the face of everybody who thinks that every Palestinian is a nationalist and wants a state, that it will be a terror state, that will be a jihadist state. But that's, you know, maybe that's true now because they've been so indoctrinated, but I think that the idea is not to pay them off for being bad actors and being addicted to genocide and all the rest of it, but actually doing what I thought was already happening a decade ago, which is to empower the moderate voices, the voices for local leadership, for clan leadership, which tend to be the, you know, the most powerful local voices in the different cities and villages, and giving them the tools to do what they need to do and not get involved except for things that affect Israel, and for us, in the meantime, to assert our sovereign rights in Judea and Samaria, and of course, over the eastern frontier in the Jordan Valley. Thank you, yeah.
Ohad, what things are you and your colleagues working on in the Knesset? What has changed? What has accelerated? Like, what is the urgency since October 7th from the political level?
There are so many things, actually. You know, I can tell you, I sit in the Security and Foreign Affairs Committee, getting the reports and seeing all the challenges that Israel has to face. And again, I'm not sure that people actually realize that how sensitive the situation is. I mean, Israel, yeah, we like to say, well, we are strong and we can do everything, but the reality is that we are facing an existential threat on these days, because what Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, did on October 7th is not just to penetrate Israel and to kill 1,200 people and to kidnap 250 people. It's not just that. He succeeded to do in one day what all Arab armies tried to do for 76 years and failed, and that is to prove that Israel is vulnerable, that you can, even though we have the best army in the world and the best intelligence in the world, that it's very fragile. And this is something which is very dangerous in the Middle East. I mean, look at what happened with Iran. Iran never before directly attacked one of its rivals. Never. Only using proxies. They always using Hezbollah from Lebanon, of course, and the Houthis in Yemen, and of course, Islamic Jihad, and all these, and their forces in Syria. Never directly. Why did they suddenly decided they got so brave to directly attack Israel with over 300 ballistic missiles. Why? Because they're feeling that Israel is weak. So this is very, very dangerous. So if we understand that this is the risk, so we have Israel needs to win this war, not just because we want to get back at Hamas. No, because we need it for our survival. So now we have to define what victory looks like, okay? So I will tell you what is the minimum. We can also talk about the maximum, but the minimum victory is that they would say that it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it. Now, if you'll count the number of dead in Gaza, this is now how, it's not the way to achieve victory, because they don't care about how many people are dying in Gaza, okay? They don't care about how many buildings are falling apart in Gaza, right? This is not a victory. What is a victory? What is the one and only prize that they consider as a defeat? Land. That's the only prize they consider as a defeat for themselves, as a victory for Israel. So the minimum victory is that Gaza will be smaller at the day after, that at least all the northern area of the Gaza Strip will be at the hands of Israel. No one will be able to get in there. It will have to be demilitarized for many years. And now we can discuss if we want to settle that area with Jewish villages, yes or no. We will argue about it in Israel. Of course, my position will be, of course, yes. But we can fight about it. But at least, again, it's not a privilege. This is something we actually do need for our survival. And so that's the minimum. And of course, I think the maximum, and I think this is one of the lessons, and we spoke about it before, that one of the lessons of October 7th is to learn to face the truth, to realize the reality. We have to wake up. This is what we have to learn, and that is to go back to the truth. So the truth is that the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel. This is why the Jewish people has to be the only one to control this area from the river to the sea. Israel will be free.
I don't think you'll find anyone. There's nobody in this room who's going to disagree with you. Follow-up question for you, Ohad. I want to bring in Gaza at the very end here in a minute, but just to return to Judea and Samaria for a second. A few days ago, I saw a clip from a liberal documentary it was called Settlers. They cited that there was 2.7 million Palestinians living in the West Bank, right? Now, obviously, 2.7. Now, obviously, I know that's not true. I've been in Nablus, I've been in Tura Messiah, I've been in Ramallah, I've been in Rawabi, and I've counted the empty houses there on camera. There's not 2.7 million Arabs. Now, that's obviously a small thing. You guys might have more insight. I would guess there's 1.5 million, something like that. But if Israel were to apply sovereignty today, which is what we all advocate for and what we push for, what happens to the Arabs who live there? I'll start with you, Ohad.
So, I just came back from Washington last night, and I met with Ambassador David Friedman, and I truly believe in his plan. I think that's the right thing we should push. I don't know if you've heard about his plan. I think you showed his video?
Last night, yeah, we showed his video, One Jewish State, yeah.
Okay, so I think that's the vision. That's the vision. Basically, we will offer the Palestinians 3 options. If you want to fight with us, we will fight you back. We will destroy you. This is one option. You want to stay? By all means. Please stay. Feel free. You'll be able to self-govern yourself locally. You will not have rights to vote for the government, at least for a generation, because after there's a whole generation that was raised in order to kill Jews. So at least for a whole generation, David Friedman called that a Puerto Rico model, just like you have here in the States. So they will not be able to vote for the government, but they will be able to manage their own local issues. So this is the second option. And the third option, if you want to leave, also, please feel free. We will even pay you whatever you want. Just, find yourself another country. Please, feel free to do whatever you want. So
in America or somewhere else?
You want them? You don't want them. Why? They're so nice. So that, and I think it's very simple. It's very simple. Yes, Israel will be the only, because at the end of the day, you can't have in such a small area two entities who want to have a national identity. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, and again, it was already proven. We've given them a state. Effectively, we gave them a state in 2005. We've seen what happened. So we cannot afford to have the same mistake, to take this brilliant experiment and expand it to the whole area of Judea and Samaria, just a few kilometers from Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Ben Gurion Airport. It's craziness, and we will not repeat that mistake again, hopefully. Please, God.
Yishai, I want to jump to you, and I've heard you say this. I've been with you in Hebron, arguing with local Arabs there, like to cause trouble. But I've heard you say on mainstream media networks, you don't have a problem with Arabs, you have a problem with jihadis that want to kill you. What percentage, especially now since October 7th, of Arabs do you think there are in Hebron that don't want to cause trouble or kill you and your family?
Well, our good friend Ashraf Jabri, who's one of the sheikhs of Hebron, is a friend of the Jewish community, told me that Hamas is riding high right now. Hamas is very attractive right now. They did a great job killing a lot of Jews, spilling a lot of blood. Folks with bloodlusts are attracted to that. And they've done a great job spreading their videos. Videos of them being violent is a winner. It's a winner on TikTok. It's a winner on Instagram. And so therefore, their market value has gone up tremendously. And so now there's much more pro-Hamas people in Hebron, especially the youth. And the answer to that again and again and again, the healthy answer to jihadism and other forms of people trying to take away our land is a strong Israel. That is the proper position. Strong Israel means that we do not tolerate. We have zero tolerance for jihadism in the schools, in the textbooks, in the mosques, even on social media. Zero tolerance for jihadism in our land and also on the borders of our land. Right now, we're not in that mindset, and we have to understand that they're riding high right now. Hamas is riding high. You want to get rid of them, that riding high effect? Crush them. Crush them. That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. You got to get rid of them in Gaza. You got to say that you assert sovereignty. And I'll tell you, I'm going to say something that is a little bit more, hard to swallow at this time. But I think Ohad said it very well and nice and easy to swallow. But I think that we have to get rid of three organizations. Three organizations need to be dismantled. One is UNRWA. They're teaching jihadism, and also they teach the sister of jihadism, which is called refugeeism, which is that like they're from this land, and and they're all refugees, 5 generations down. So they teach them that whole narrative, and of course we know now that they are aiders and abettors of actual physical terrorism, along with narrative terrorism. They're also physically helping, aid and abet actual killing of Jews. So you got to get rid of UNRWA. The next thing you got to get rid of is the Palestinian Authority. You got to stop paying money to the Palestinian Authority. Stop transferring money. I mean, in Hebron, I've picked up books from the trash, school books. Kids have school books. I picked them up from the trash. I used my Google Lens. I didn't even need to use the Google Lens. It was so obvious. Hate. 2 + 2 Jews equals dead Jews equals 4 dead Jews, Like terrorism in the school books. The Palestinian Authority pays for that. We know that. So it's time to wake up and be like, we are defunding this thing. We are rolling back this whole entity. And here's another entity, which is a trickier one, which people here in the audience are less familiar with, but I'm familiar with every single day. There's another entity that supports. So we have UNRWA, that's the internationals. The Palestinian Authority, that's the local Arabs. But there's another entity that a lot of people here don't know about, which really supports the two-state solution, the creation of Palestine on our land, and that's called the civil administration, the COGAT. The truth is that our Israel is one of the big supporters of the Palestinian Authority. Our Israel, the elements in Israel, our left, our progressives in Israel, we have a whole army unit that's set up to actually create Palestine. That's the truth. That's the truth. I could sugarcoat it for you, but that's the truth. These are three, and by the way, this organization has very little oversight, and there's corruption there and a million other problems. This organization's gotta go away. What needs to be done is civilian control of these areas. Israel's got to call it annex or call it assert sovereignty. We got to offer, as Knesset member Ohad Tal said, we got to offer residency to people who are non-jihadist, pro-Israel Arabs, which exist, and they'll exist more when we're strong. Then they'll be like, okay, they're here to stay, so good. You know, I have to accept them. And of course, jihadis, they gotta go. They gotta go. They have no place in our land. Maybe there could be local rule like you know, in major Arab cities, but as long as it's not jihadist. That's just the way it's gotta be. And we've gotta use October 7th, and I said this yesterday, use the murder and the death to honor their blood by changing something for real and going towards the direction of health.
So Carolyn, two kind of connected questions for you. One is, practically and politically speaking, do you think Israel could apply sovereignty to the land of Israel tomorrow? And the second question is, a lot of people ask us, because as a non-Jew myself, a non-Israeli, speaking to a lot of non-Israelis, people from the nations, we're always advocating for the entirety of the land of Israel to be Israel, right? But people always say, well, isn't that Israel's job? Doesn't the government of Israel have to make those decisions? How impacted is the government of Israel? How impacted are their decisions by the support of other nations, both on a government level and a non-government level?
So the easiest answer, the easiest thing to do is to get the Israeli people behind sovereignty. Sovereignty not only in Judea and Samaria, but sovereignty inside of sovereign Israel, where we don't apply the laws equally to Jews and Arabs. We barely enforce the law towards the Arabs, and I would argue we over-enforce the law towards Jews, but whatever. And you probably could get a very large proportion of Israelis, maybe 80, that would support annexing parts of Gaza and chucking as many people as possibly would be willing to leave from there after what happened on October 7th. So I think that the easiest part of the question is the political aspect of it. I think the bureaucratic aspect of it is very different. I mean, the year before the October 7th invasion, the left was burning down the country because they lost the elections. And we finally had a stable coalition of 64 out of 120 seats in the Knesset that wanted to roll back the deep state. And the place that we were going to start was in the judiciary and in the legal fraternity, which, very much like the situation here with the Department of Justice and the FBI and a lot of the progressive judges, is very pro-national, very pro-Palestinian, thinks that the right in Israel is the biggest problem, not our enemies, and goes very light with terrorists and goes very heavy with politicians they don't like and with political activists that they don't like. And so we have an unequal enforcement of law. And then the second area that we were going to move towards was the General Staff of the Army, where you have it as a closed gentleman's club. Religious Zionists, for instance, are unfortunately overrepresented by, like 500% over their percentage in the population in terms of the fallen soldiers in the war. And it's the price that the religious Zionist community is paying, not just the religious Zionists, all of sort of the second Israel, religious Zionists, Sephardic Jews, is totally out of proportion with the leftists who are burning the country down because they lost the elections. And, it's been one prolonged period of angst, of anxiety for our sons who are fighting, and for mourning for our neighbors' sons who have been killed. We've lost so many people just where we live, in Efrat and in Gush Etzion. We have 3 new rows of graves in our regional cemetery. So we have been paying an extraordinary cost. And it's a big, I mean, I feel it all the time. And we just had Memorial Day, which was a really hard day. They're not going anywhere. I wrote my book, and actually I told David Friedman at the time, I said, this was sort of for the foreign audience, because the truth is that we're not going to be able to apply Israeli law until we have reform of our judicial system. And in the IDF as well, it's this club that's totally non-reflective of the fighting forces in the army. There's like a glass ceiling for non-leftists in the Army of Brigadier General, and you get there and you won't go into the general staff. They will figure out something to incriminate you with, to push you out, or to think of any excuse not to promote you. And they just bring in themselves and they clone themselves, and it's a disaster. And we have a general staff that's not worthy of the men in the field. So they're also going to be opposed to sovereignty. And then finally, in terms of your question about Israel's friends abroad who are pushing for it. So, Israel is very sensitive to what is said about us internationally. Obviously, the bad stuff is easier to care about because it's so big and so bad, the way that we're demonized and criminalized. But I would say that the more vocal the support of nations of the world for Israeli sovereignty, the more powerful the people inside of Israeli society, like ourselves, who understand just how important it is, how vital it is for our survival, we become empowered as well. Just as the left in Israel that is post-Zionist is empowered by the UN, by the Biden administration, which is so hostile to Israel and to Jewish sovereignty. The vast majority of Israelis are empowered. I'll just give you one last anecdote to tell you. So my husband's family comes from Morocco, and he's the oldest of 10, and he has his father and a lot of his brothers are ultra-Orthodox rabbis, and so we have a very diverse family. And when you guys opened up the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem 6 years ago last week, thank you very much, David Friedman and President Trump. So I was there, and my husband and his family, like everybody else in the country, was watching it on TV. And they had 3 evangelical pastors, I think, who spoke there. The one with the biggest, most booming voice was, of course, Pastor Hagee. And he was saying, and the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And all of these Israelis are like watching her, like, and they couldn't believe it. And they're like, who is that guy? We don't have a chief rabbi that talks that way, And I mean, his speech, people were talking about him. Who was that guy? Where is he? Where did he come from? And because we live in our own world, right? Everybody lives in their own world, in their own communities. And the idea that there's this guy and he's got 10 million people in his organization, and that there are 100 million people in America who are just like him, they're like, really? So, that was an eye-opener, and it was so empowering for the people of Israel to see that outpouring of support and love that day and in general. So let me tell you, it's hugely impactful. So again, you guys are very important, and the louder you make your voices heard, not only the more powerful your voices are here in America, but they also buffet us in Israel and help us to move forward with what we have to do, which, as Yishai and Ohad both said, we have to do in order to survive.
Thank you. Ohad, quickly, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because as a member of Knesset, yeah, you guys go ahead.
I'm taking that back home and giving it to my father-in-law. Let me tell you.
As a member of Knesset...
It's because you said your husband is Moroccan.
Yes, exactly.
That's right. Tell us from a Knesset level, let's say we have, including the online audience and everyone here, let's say we have 1,000 people here. They go back to their communities. Maybe all of us collectively could touch, 1 million people eventually, if everybody works really hard here. How much does that affect the Knesset of Israel if everyone here, everyone watching online goes home and they begin advocating for Israel to be sovereign in the entirety of their land? Does that have any effect? Does that give Israel's Knesset the koach, the strength, to move forward?
Definitely. I think that one of the problems, and I talk about it all the time, that the greatest challenge of the Jewish people in our generation is the challenge of identity. We have to realize who we are, why we are in the land of Israel, and the problem is that, or Jews sometimes tend to remember who they are only if the nations around them reminding them who they are. So I think October 7th was such an event that helped us a little bit to open our eyes, but we need more push. That's the truth. Again, we're here to say the truth. We need the push. And the fact, and just as Caroline, as you said, that people were so surprised to hear Pastor Hagee and to see his support for Israel, because people in Israel, they used to hear only that people hate us, okay, and want to kill us. That's the narrative. They don't know of you guys. They don't know that there's millions of people in the world, Christians, who love Israel. They don't understand, they don't realize that this is the reality. So yes, we definitely need you, and we need you to voice your messages, and we need you to push your elected officials to push Israel to do the right thing. I mean, I wish we could have done that all by ourselves. And you know what? Maybe we will at the end of the day, but it will be much, much longer probably, and we will maybe suffer along the way quite a lot. But if you will help us realize who we are and what is our role in this world, that can definitely help.
Thank you. Okay, question for you, Yishai. 2 minutes, we're running out of time. Does messaging matter? In other words, is it important that everyone here and everyone watching and everyone in our communities stop using the term West Bank and instead say Judea and Samaria? Is it important
what is the West Bank?
To say, I have friends who are Jews living in Judea. Does messaging matter?
Okay, I'll answer that in 1 minute, but before that, let me answer the previous question in 1 minute. There's a false concept out there, which is the world. The world wants X. And I'm always saying to people, what do you mean by the world? There's the new Dutch government, Geert Wilders. There's the new guy in Argentina, Malay. There's the India's with us. They're in favor of more or less anti-jihadism. There's a large segment there that's anti-jihadist. There's the other America. People are like, America's is for the two-state solution. I'm like, you mean Biden's America? But there's a whole other America. There's a whole other America. This messaging of the world is a leftist propaganda. The world. What do you mean the world? There's a lot of the world. There's all kinds of people in the world. Not everybody's against us. A lot of people are for us. A lot of people have common sense. Not everybody wants, Israel to be taken over by the jihad or wants their campuses to be taken over by the jihad. So, okay, that's number one. Number two, regarding messaging. Yeah, it's very important. Of course, the left is genius at words. They're brilliant at words, and they're always changing words. But sometimes you could use their tricks against them. For example, the word settler. Settler has become a negative word. By the way, I was in the bathroom over here. I was trying to get into the bathroom. It said occupied. I was like, what kind of conference is this? Anyway. Sometimes in the airplane,
it was occupied by a crazy settler.
That's right. There's Abramowitz. Ari Abramowitz is in the bathroom. And sometimes on the airplane, it says PA is active, And I'm like, no, it's not. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, so of course messaging matters, but sometimes you got to know when to use it, when not to use it. If you're talking to a group of people and they want you to say Palestinians, sometimes I say the so-called Palestinians. I'll say that. I'll do the hashtags, whatever. As settlers, sometimes I use it positively. For example, to get on Piers Morgan's show, I said to him, well, you haven't had a settler on. Maybe you need a settler, And they're like, okay, well, we need a settler. So, sometimes you can use it to your advantage, but there's no doubt that the world has created all kinds of words. And the number one biggest word of them all is occupation. It's the mother of all lies. Because what occupation means is that the Jewish people, for example, were occupying, Hebron is Israeli-occupied Hebron. Are you joking? We've been living in this town for 3,500 years. We had a first temple there. We had a first temple in Jerusalem, a second temple. All the time we were living in Hebron, we were living under various occupations. If they were the Roman the Byzantine, the Roman Byzantine, First Arab Conquest, Crusader, Mamluk, Turk, British, Jordanian, and we're back, okay? So they tell you you're occupying. I'm like, what do you mean occupation? We are a liberation force. We have come back home to our ancestral homeland, and we've been living in this town. Don't tell me the stories. They want to tell us that we are white colonialists, not from this land. That's what they want to tell us. And we're like, no. When I was a kid, I lived in America when I was a kid. They used to give me those standardized tests, and you had to fill out, what race are you? So I'm supposed to fill out white, Caucasian, what was it? It was Caucasian, not Spanish or something like that. I'd be Hispanic, Caucasian, non-Hispanic. I was a kid, I was like 8 years old. I'd circle other. I would write Hebrew Semite. Okay, so yeah, it definitely matters. But at the same time, let's not get overly stuck. You know what I mean? Sometimes they're like, don't say this word. All right, let's do the big fight. The big fight is to hold on to our land.
Okay. As we've been organizing this conference, everyone asked me, they said, so what's the purpose of this conference? And I think everybody here and everybody watching wants to know, what's our homework? What are we taking home with us? I'd like to hear 30 seconds from each of you. What would you tell everyone listening and watching today? What can they go home and do the day after tomorrow to help better stand with and support Israel? Yishai, let's start with you and come down the line.
I'll do it in 30 seconds. Teach the Bible to your kids. Teach the Bible. Especially the so-called, see, here's nomenclature, especially the so-called Old Testament. Teach it to them, they'll understand what the right thing to do is. Especially the book of Genesis. It's very simple. Teach it to them, and their whole life is going to go in the right direction. And the other thing is send your kids to Israel. Send yourselves to Israel. And third thing is, do what we're doing right now, which is preach the choir. Get the choir singing loud. We need that choir. That choir, the people in this room are going to make a difference. And if you talk after this conference, of this summit, to 3 other people, that's a humongous magnification, and keep it going. Keep it going strong.
Thank you. Thank you. Carolyn, what's the homework you'd give everyone here?
Well, yeah, I'll just follow up on Yishai because he really gave you the right homework. But, one of the things that I say in terms of language and messaging is, I was talking to some other people last night, and where are you from? From Efrat, where is that? And I said, well, it's just south of Bethlehem, it's in Judea. And I said, you probably heard of our most famous resident. He said, oh yeah, who? And I said, King David. And they were like, really? And I said, yeah, he grew up right here, right where my kid plays ball, absolutely. And that's big, right? And so, yeah, along the lines of Genesis. And one of the interesting things about Genesis is that, we have our greatest commentary is named Rashi. And Rashi, when he's explaining the first book of the Bible, he asks the question. He says, why doesn't it start with the Exodus? After all, the people of Israel were born with the Exodus. Why do we go back to Abraham? Why do we go back to creation? And the answer that Rashi gave, and he lived in Normandy in northern France during the first crusade, right? And
11th century.
Yeah, 11th century. And so he knew what the predations of exile were. And his explanation for why the Bible started with the story of the patriarchs and the matriarchs was because God wanted to make sure that everybody throughout time understood that the land of Israel belonged to the Jews. That the most important thing, because we're so small and because we're persecuted and because he knew what was going to happen, he wanted to ensure, with the way that he placed the books of Moses, that everybody would know that this is no joke, that this is the promised land, and that he promised it only to one people, and that's the Jewish people, that's the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I think that exactly what Yishai said is the truth, is that the better people know the foundations of their own identity in the Bible, the better they understand the difference between right and wrong, the difference they understand between good and evil. It's all there. I never understood when I was a kid, how is it possible that Abraham Lincoln learned everything from the Bible, right? And he did. That was how he learned how to read. That's what he read. That's what he studied, only the Bible. But now that I'm old, I see that it's true. Like, all you need to do is do that book. And you do that book, you learn math, you learn science, you learn everything right there in that book. And So, and you learn who you are, and you learn why you are who you are. And so I think that that is the most important thing to do. And yeah, and go home and tell people about what you know and what you're seeing. And you do it anyways. So now hopefully, because you're here at this conference, you can do it with more knowledge, with a little bit more humor from people like Yishai and my father-in-law, and you can move forward. And that's exactly, you know, I always say you have to preach to the choir, otherwise they'll stop going to church. And the truth is you have to preach to the choir, because one of the things that's so important when they talk about, we say in our prayers, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah u'dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, that from Zion comes forth the Torah, the law, and the word of God from Jerusalem. And the idea is, and then we always talk about that we're a light unto the nations. And the question is, what is the light? Is it the diaspora communities that they go out into the world? And the answer is no, it's Jerusalem, it's Zion. And the better we are at doing our job as Jews, the more light goes out into the world from Zion, and the message of God comes to the world through us. And so by supporting us, you're increasing that light that's coming out of Zion, and you're making it stronger, and you're making yourself stronger, you're making your home stronger, you're making your society stronger, your country stronger, and you're making us, it's a reciprocal relationship. And so we need each other, and here we are together. Wonderful, isn't it?
Thank you. Thank you. Ohad, 30 seconds, final
30
thoughts.
seconds. You know, before the previous session, I attended the panel before, and this one, I went to speak in the Jewish school here in Nashville, and
I needed that selfie for a fraud. Come on.
Okay,
for
yeah.
the people of the front.
You want one with the audience?
I got to send that to the township. Everybody's going to see it. They're going to love it. They're going to be proud.
So I went to speak at the Jewish school here, and they were celebrating the end of the year, and they spoke about leadership and about what leadership means to take responsibility. So the homework I want to give to you is to take the responsibility just as well. I mean, if we have here 1,000 people in the audience today, let's make a decision that next year, please God, we will have here 3,000 people, and let's please God make them be also people in their 20s, in their 30s. We want to have here the young generation also, your future generation, to support Israel just as well. I mean, this is, of course, as much as the Walders are doing a great job, this is not just their responsibility, this is all of our responsibility.
That's right. Amen. Hey, let's give a huge round of applause. Yishai Fleisher, Caroline Glick, member of Knesset Ohad Tal. Thank you.